Hey friends, it's Joel Richardson, and this is The Underground. So in this episode, we're actually going to do something a bit different than we've done before. We're actually going to interview a guest. His name is Joel Greene. He's the author of this book, The Immunity Code. So we're actually going to discuss the issue of health, nutrition, and that's something I've never really jumped into. For what it's worth, I've mentioned a few times that I have some health issues, and this program isn't about me. We're trying to most often look at the scriptures and discuss world events in light of biblical prophecy and this type of thing. But on a personal note, I listen to a lot of podcasts. I do read a lot of different books on health and nutrition and different things, mostly because I'm trying to take care of myself. So I'll be turning 49 here in about 2 weeks. And obviously, in order to do what I do, travel all over the world and so forth, it's important for me to be relatively healthy. And what I've found personally, at least in my own studies and just reading and so forth, is the whole world of nutrition and health. It can be incredibly frustrating, especially to the novice. I mean, if you don't have a master's degree or PhD in this kind of thing, you're largely going to rely on the experts. And so, for example, I've got some autoimmune related issues with regard to my gut. And so I've read a handful of different books, and I find it can often be very frustrating because what you find is, just as an example, I'll read a particular book on the plant paradox, for example. It's a pretty popular book. And in that book, it lays out and it says, look, we've often been told that plants, fruits and vegetables and so forth, that's the way to go. You'll read one book that says, if you want to heal your gut, eat everything, raw fruits and vegetables. This is the way of Eden and this type of thing, and everything will go perfect, and here's all the testimonies, and this is the only way to go. Meat is evil, and so on and so forth. But then you read the plant paradox, and it says, well, actually, plants produce various poisons. They produce lectins. They produce oxalates and different things that are actually poisonous to your body. This is God's defense mechanism so that they're not devoured by insects and this type of thing. And if you eat too many raw fruits and vegetables, you're actually going to damage yourself. And you go, oh gosh, this is something new. I've never heard this. And so then you're frustrated. You go, well, should I eat fruits and vegetables or should I not? And then you read another book, and it's going to be completely contradictory. And everyone is so dogmatic. And one of the things that I so appreciated when I read The Immunity Code, I would genuinely say this is probably the best book that I've read, and I've read quite a lot, often on diet. But this is probably the best book that I've read on this subject, and it's a deep dive. It's a heavy dive into the issue again of health, nutrition, and anti-aging. The subtitle, by the way, is "The New Paradigm for Real Health and Radical Anti-Aging," and a few of the things that I appreciate about Joel's approach is that he shuns what he calls baby talk. So in short, baby talk is essentially easy answers, real black and white answers. Antioxidants are always good. And then he goes, well, actually, that's not always the case. Or, the alkaline diet, that's always good. Acid's bad. He goes, well, sometimes yes, sometimes no. And so he really cuts through a lot of the, I'll just say, dogmatic health nonsense, and really tries to get into a lot of the mechanisms, just the biological mechanisms, and he really has a fantastic understanding of the way things work, the way nutrition works, and so forth. And I was pleasantly surprised to find out that he was a believer as well. We had a bit of a dialogue after I read the book. I actually listened to, for what it's worth, I listened to the audiobook, and I've worked through the hard copy as well. And let me just mention before we jump in, I want to introduce our guest. His website is Veep Nutrition, so that's V-E-E-P, V-E-E-P, nutrition.com. And I want to recommend that if you do get the book, or if you get the digital version, to also get the audio version. I'm an audiobook guy. I like going for walks. I can listen to a whole book while I'm going for a walk. But it's important to also get the hardcover or the digital version, because there's a lot of charts and diagrams and different things that you want to be able to lay your eyes on as well. So I actually bought both. He's got some good deals. But again, you can get it all at veepnutrition.com. So with all that said, Joel, welcome to The Underground.
Thank you, Joel, so much. I'm kind of I'm a big fanboy of you myself. So when you bought my book, it came through, and I look at every order that came through, and I was like, is that Joel Richardson? And you know, I looked at my wife, and I was like, Joel Richardson, on my back!
Yeah, I was surprised because it was out of context. I mean, if it was in a church context, people go, oh, well, you know, Joel, I've read all your books, but you know, I just worked through this. As I said, you know, you're really a genius in the world. You know, again, I listen to a lot of podcasts, and there are those that know what they're talking about, and there are those that are pretend to know what they're talking about. And it's obvious that you really you understand what you're talking about. You've been in this a long time. So I want to just introduce yourself to the listeners and just talk about your background, your experience in the whole world of health and nutrition, sort of what qualifies you to have written the Immunity Code.
I get asked that a lot. I would say the foremost qualification is exactly what you were talking about, which is just being, for decades, super confused because I would just listen to expert after expert after expert, and I would try everything, you know, going back to just being a teenager and trying everything, you know, from the early 80s, watching the fitness boom kind of take off and being a part of that, you know, as a consumer. And then, you know, when I got out of college, I didn't go into making a living being fit. I was a regular person, had a regular job, but I was just always kind of on the forefront of everything that came out because I was, you know, digesting material as fast as possible. And what I found out was that I would try things, and then what would happen is I would get some benefit in the short term, and then long term, I would get some liability or some negative result from the things I was trying. And this went on for a number of years. And the 90s for me were, you know, experimenting with things like time-restricted feeding and, you know, the keto diet and all that stuff. And then I had this phase of just eating raw and, you know, whole and natural and paleo and all that in the late 90s. And then I had this phase of just eating, you know, macronutrients to the letter, and all those things kind of work the same way for me. I'd get these, you know, great results up front, and then later on, I would have all these other issues related to those. And so, kind of interesting thing happened to me in the early '90s. I had done a meal replacement that just came out, and I got really lean on that, really lean for about 5 years, and then I started eating uncontrollably, and I didn't know what I had done. And then I know now what I had done. I'd really upticked a lot of the body's countermeasures to weight reduction. And we tend to think of, you know, words condition how we think. Language conditions thought, and we use these words like weight loss or fat loss, you know, and we just kind of throw them around, but our body doesn't understand those. That doesn't mean anything to our body. All our body understands is that fat cells shrink. And historically speaking, when fat cells have shrunk, the reason has been because there wasn't enough food. And the body has very, very good defenses against fat cell shrinking in order to keep you alive. So, I just started eating uncontrollably. I didn't understand it. I started doing all this research, and I started a website about the year 2000. I started publishing, you know, what I was finding about, you know, different gut hormones and things, and I kind of went along this path for a few years, just publishing research, and then I took over this company, a technology company, and I worked my way up, became the CEO, and you know, I had this experience of I'd been doing all these recommendations for 30 plus years, and really I was just kind of, really what it was is I landed smack in the real world ecosystem that most people live in, attempting to apply information from a completely different ecosystem, which is the fitness ecosystem. And what I found out was that everything that I knew required a bunch of time that I just didn't have. I was working 14, 15-hour days. And I went from being really fit to really fat over 3 years, and our company's revenue took off, and so did my weight. And it really bothered me. And by the end of that, I really set out to figure out, you know, what could I have done differently, you know, because I was in this startup company, and we were just under lots of pressure and growing really fast, and all the things a lot of people find themselves in, you know, in real life. And I had zero time and tons of stress, and you know, things that happen in the real world. And that led me to make a long story very short, it led me to developing this software called the Veep Nutrition System, which was an attempt to solve the problem. And I kind of bumbled my way through figuring out what to do with it. And luckily, I would say kind of a dumb decision, really no credit to me, was that we wound up, instead of trying to take it to the consumer market, taking it to the corporate wellness market. And our first customer was a major hospital chain. And that was a real introduction. I discovered that most medical personnel are under tremendous stress. And, a lot of them have weight issues, health issues. And it's because they work these massive shifts. They have tons of pressure. And what happened from that is we started getting a lot of really high profile clients like City of Phoenix, City of Houston, big corporations. And I was in a good position because I had really begun on my own investigating the gut biome. And basically what happened was I had this software, had thousands of people using it, and I was just every day in the research. And whenever I would read something really interesting, I would create a protocol for it, and I would implement it in the program, and I could get immediate feedback and discover if it worked or not. And so that what happened to me was in order to sell the program, I had to know the material as good as the people they were sticking in front of me, which were MDs and PhDs. And it was just by necessity. And a bunch of things happened. I wound up consulting on some pretty high level projects, engineering foods and things like that. And I kind of got known in a little circle of people. And people would ask me the question, which is, what should I do? And I would get into this really long-winded answer that required a book. And so I wrote a book. and here we are. So that's my story. And I'm just, when people ask me that question, the answer really is that I'm really just a consumer who got educated. Really got educated because I was just so sick of not knowing what to think.
Another, I think, important part of Joel's story is that really you were on the cutting edge. I mean, right now, keto is everywhere. Keto is sort of the trend of the day. Or intermittent fasting is super popular. Joel was really working with keto or paleo or intermittent fasting back in the 90s, even back in the late 80s. And then he's experimenting with the gut biome or learning about the gut biome really years before. That's a real huge issue right now in the nutritional field. So he's been ahead of the curve on several different issues. And one of the things that I like about your book as well is that it's realistic. This is the thing with so many diet books. You can get some particular health guru, and they can be incredibly fit, and of course they're going to use themselves and their physique as advertising for their model. But the question is not, can someone get fit? That's easy. Anyone can do that. But can they stay fit for 10, 15, 20 years? Because most often, as you described, life happens. Suddenly you're working a 12, 15-hour day, and you're eating from the vending machine or whatever it might be, and you're stressed. You don't even have time. Nutrition and paying attention, it requires a lot of time when you're planning your meals and all those type of things. So you have a realistic approach. It's an approach that educates us so that we can understand how to stay healthy in a very busy world. Most people's lives are incredibly busy and stressful and so on and so forth. So that's the fact that it's realistic is something that I really appreciated as well.
That's no small thing. I'm always coming from the perspective of being a consumer. And, for many years, I would buy into what were essentially fantasies that were not telling the truth about what it took to, obtain a certain level of health or an appearance. And long story short, after having been kind of in and around that for many decades, the net of it is really that 99% of it doesn't translate into the real world. And it's, again, I describe it as an ecosystem problem where you have the real world ecosystem has these constraints. And these constraints are akin to a deck of cards. It's like you're getting advice from someone on how to play poker, who only plays with or how to play blackjack, who only plays with face cards. And you are playing with all the cards, and you can't seem to get the hands they get hand after hand. And it's because you have a different set of odds in the real world ecosystem. And really, there's this idea that we bought into a lot of fantasies that aren't true. One of them is that if you get in shape, that solves the problem. And, I've been in top shape many, many times over a number of years. I'm not young. And it means absolutely nothing. It doesn't mean a thing. It means nothing. And that's the hardest thing to get your arm around, because you think it solves it. But actually, the point I make in the book is that, no, it actually creates the problem, because we're not dealing with what's true mechanistically about when fat cells shrink. And when fat cells shrink, there are all these mechanistic defenses, most of them immune-based, that step up to counter the reaction. So what you see over time with most people is they do something when they're young, they want to get in shape, and they kind of have this upward sine wave that looks like this over time, where the bottom of it is I got in shape, or my weight, and the top is, oh, I'm out of shape, I got to do something. And you see this over time. And eventually what happens is they just can't lose weight. They can't. And a lot of that has to do with repeated cycles of gaining and losing weight, and it's very, very damaging long term. Because one of the reasons it's called the immunity code is that when we dig into it, we dig into how things actually work. Most of the body's control mechanisms are immune mechanisms. They're immune by their very nature. For example, when you lose body fat, that's an injury. You're injuring your fat. It doesn't sound like it to us, but if you mechanistically dive into what actually happened, it's an injury. An injury is mediated by the immune system. And so there's all these immune mechanisms that kick in to repair the damage. And what happens over time is populations of immune cells can shift, and all kinds of things can happen that make it very, very difficult to get control of the body. And I started the book off with the line that says your body is a gift. You didn't design it, you didn't make it, it's yours to use. And that's really the theme of the book, that God gave us our bodies are a gift, and someday we're going to leave these bodies and we'll get a new body. But for now, these bodies are the mechanism that serve our greater purpose, purpose in this world. And so we need to take care of them to the best extent that we can. And that was kind of the ethos of the book.
Yeah, I love the fact that you take what you call an immunocentric approach. One of the other sort of fundamental concepts that Joel functions under is that not only do we need to avoid the baby talk, in other words, the overly simplified answers with regard to health and nutrition, but we also have to understand that there's always a proper order of operations when it comes to whether it be exercise or eating or nutrition or supplementation, any of these different things. And so he uses the analogy, for example, of somebody saying, well, gas is good for a car. You could say, well, yeah, it is, but it has to be put into the car in the proper order. If you just try to start the car before you add the gas, that's a problem, etc. And so it's the same thing with regard to nutritional supplements or eating or exercise or any of these things. For what it's worth, I get up in the morning and I take a big shovel full of supplements and different things, and I don't do it in any proper order. What's that? Yeah. I sent Joel the list of all the junk that I take. And, I'm probably, some of it's probably helpful, some of it's probably not. But I love the fact that he focuses on the order of operations, beginning with the foundation of your gut and your immune system. So I actually want to jump into that. But before I do, just because, my audience, I'm assuming 99% of everyone that's listening to the show is a Christian. You touch on something, and it's almost sort of out of the rest of the interview, but I want to touch on it because I found it fascinating. And this book, it's every chapter is a deep dive into some particular facet, again, of health, of the body, of nutrition, and there's a lot here. To be honest, this could be 3 or 4 books easily. But there's a lot of little nuggets along the way, and one of the things that you touch on, and it really caught my attention, is what's called Circuseptin rhythms. And so explain what that is, because I had never heard of this, and it really is a profound validation of, I'll just say, the God of the Bible, his design of everything. And it's something that I've never heard of, but you touch on it in the book, and it affects us. It affects more than just humans. It affects simple organisms and different things like that. But explain what Circuseptin rhythms are.
Yeah, it's actually not a new concept. It's an old concept, scientifically speaking, that in researching the book, I kind of came across. And basically, the title, the secondary title of the book is The New Paradigm for radical health and radical anti-aging and health. And part of that paradigm is the old paradigm. The old way we've been looking at things focuses on just the what. It's just the what. Like, is grapeseed oil good? Is meat bad, or are carbs good? It's this what question. But when you really dive into it, the way the body works is the body is diurnal in its very nature. It runs on a clock. And when you look at the clocks and the way the body runs, the question of when and how become equally important to what. So you have a what, when, and how for anything and everything. And when you begin to understand that, you have a syntax or a language. And what's interesting is that looking at the question of when, it's not just, we don't have just a diurnal rhythm. There seems to be very good evidence that anything that has a body has a 7-day rhythm, has what's called circuseptin, septin meaning 7, circa meaning every, so every 7 days. And the evidence that's there seems to suggest that it goes beyond social conventions. So when you first explain this to people, they're like, oh, well, that's just because people go to work on a Monday, so that's why we have more stress on a Monday, and you start to kind of look at it that way. But that gets kind of very interesting when you look at other animals and different things like mollusks and birds, and it seems to be the case that just about anything with a body actually has a very real 7-day rhythm built into it. And we also have seasonal rhythms. We have rhythms that are like we sleep more in the winter, testosterone's higher in the winter, people die more in the winter, it's easier to get lean in the summer. And so there's this very interesting thing that it brings up right in our face right away, which is that clocks and timing in particular, that there's a natural 7-day cycle. And the evidence or the research seems to support that. So.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I mean, just, it's not conventional wisdom. I mean, it's not, you would assume, there's a degree to where you would assume, well, maybe the body works on a particular cycle in alignment with the moon or, different things like that. You could say a 30-day cycle. But the fact that there is this scientifically established principle that our bodies are tuned to a 7-day cycle, it's just, I just found that fascinating. And even mollusks, they're not even kosher.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and reading some of the original papers on it, some marine vertebrates were like in the category, and just a bunch of different things you wouldn't think would have that. So it's very interesting.
Okay, so I want to jump in because I want to touch on. I mean, we're just sort of skimming a rock over the surface of so much that's in the book, but I want to touch on some of the actual practical stuff that Joel touches on. So because he believes that the foundation for all health is, one, your immune system, which largely begins in the gut, he focuses on essentially healing the gut first. And of course, gut problems, everything from leaky gut syndrome to colitis or Crohn's or this, that, or the other thing. This is epidemic in modern society, and there's probably any number of reasons that we could point to for this. But he focuses on getting your digestive system, your gut, in good health. And one of the interesting protocols that he lays out is a protocol of eating apple peels. And he talks about their benefit in terms of, it's called acromancy. I don't pretend to necessarily know what that is or how it works, but I want you to touch on this protocol of eating apple peels. Why does it work? How long should someone do it? How regularly should someone implement the protocol? And how do you do it yourself?
It gets to most people that I've come across have some type of gut-related issue. It could just be a gluten intolerance. It could be, you get really gassy, but it's very, very common, very common. And what's scary is, conditions are very common, things like colitis and Crohn's and things like that. They're very, very common. And so at the front of the book, the very first thing, just start having people dive into is sort of retuning the gut. And there's some very simple, easy to do protocols in there. One of them involves just taking the skins off of apples and titrating up, starting with like a small dose of those and then adding a bit more here. And you do it for about 15 days. And it's not meant to be done indefinitely, but it's very much like if you took your car into the shop, and the very first thing they would do is they'd change the oil. And it's kind of akin to changing the oil and getting a tune-up in the car. It's something you need to do periodically. You may not need to do it all the time, but it's interesting because you can think in terms of what feeds you and what feeds the bacteria in your gut. And one of the things I kind of talk a lot about in the book is learning to feed them and not necessarily feed you. And so the skins of apples don't really feed you. They feed bacteria in your gut, and they feed very key bacteria, a couple of very important ones. One of them is the principal bacteria involved in maintaining the gut lining. It's called Akkermansia mucinilpa. And apple peels have very, very long color pigments that are very long chain color pigments. And what they do is they ferment in specific parts of the gut, and they stimulate their food for the bacteria Akkermansia. And generally speaking, Akkermansia confers, it's what's called a commensal bacteria, so it confers tremendous health on the host. Now, that's not always true in the case of certain autoimmune conditions like MS. You can have overactive immune signals, things like interferon gamma. They can be overactive, and what those will do is they will stimulate populations of Akkermansia, and you'll get too much. But generally speaking, if you don't have like an autoimmune issue or things like that, it's a good thing to know how, or have in your tool set an understanding of how to stimulate more of that bacteria when you need to. And that's really kind of the way I looked at the book, is that it's like a tool belt. I'm just arming you with tools.
Okay. I'm going to ask you an interesting side question. So I have a friend that's actually in the underground church in the Middle East, a real leader, and with MS. So what would be a simple protocol for someone with MS, apart from, obviously, as you just said, apple peels are going to be counterproductive, but what would just be a foundational thing that you would encourage someone with MS? Again, this is not medical advice, but just based on your experience, what would be beneficial?
So MS can be very, very tricky, but essentially what you have in that case is you have Akkermansia penetrating the gut and getting into the bloodstream. So the trick with that is you have to focus on sealing the gut without spinning up Akkermansia, which is tricky to do. Mm-hmm. But one of the things that I would focus on would be very key strains of bifidobacteria. So, in fact, the other thing I mentioned in the book, right at the very front, are a special kind of carbohydrate called human milk oligosaccharides, and they're called HMOs for short. And they are present at birth in mother's milk, and what they do is they help build the immune system in us. And so I would probably start with a combination of human milk oligosaccharides with very key strains of bifidobacteria, like Bifidobacteria bifidum, maybe Bifidobacteria infantis, in very small doses, and see if you get any amelioration. Because what we're looking to do is seal the gut by getting the butyrate-producing species to make more of this special fat that helps to seal the gut. But it's a tricky thing with something like that. There's a lot of I don't want to get into giving medical advice, but there's a lot of like trial and error involved with that.
Interesting. Yeah. So I mean, and this is again one of the foundational nutritional supplements that you recommend is HMOs, which interestingly, because of this, my kids think I'm strange. I eat baby formula. I mean, I add it to my smoothies and so forth. So I've got baby formula that has the HMOs. So I want to tease this out a little bit. Human milk oligosaccharides. How are these manufactured? How are they produced? Because obviously it doesn't come from, there's not some factory with lactating mothers producing, so I'm curious, how in the world do they create HMOs?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So you can get bacteria to work like little factories and make you anything you need. And so one of the ways that you can get HMOs is through fermentation. And so there's some of the manufacturing processes there's about 5 big companies making them right now. Some of it's a little bit proprietary, but generally speaking, you can get bacteria to ferment what you need.
Okay. So these oligosaccharides, which, it's interesting for what it's worth, and this is probably a big part of why a lot of people in my generation have gut issues, because back when I was a kid, Nestle said, hey, working mothers, guess what? You can bottle feed your children. It's the modern age. Breastfeeding is sort of passé. It's too much work, and you can just give your kids a bottle. And then unfortunately, a lot of kids that were not breastfed, that were bottle fed, such as myself, end up with gut issues later in life. And so this is one of the things that can be beneficial for folks like myself, is actually supplementing with the HMOs. But I have another question. So I had initially heard you on the Ben Greenfield podcast. Ben is a he focuses on nutritional health and biohacking and different things. Also a believer, kind of an interesting, unusual guy. But he talks a lot about bovine colostrum, supplementing with bovine colostrum. And this is popular, obviously, in the health community and so forth. What are the benefits and differences between taking bovine cow colostrum? So this is the milk. It's powdered milk made from a cow, the first milk after the baby is born. And you can buy it online. It's a bit pricey. But what are the differences in terms of the benefits between taking bovine colostrum versus baby formula?
Well, the reason to take baby formula is that some of the newer baby formulas you'll see on the label HMO. They're putting them in the label, and it's like it's kind of I grew up poor, so like I'm always looking for for like affordable ways to do biohacking, because it can be very, very, very expensive. And so you can buy these little stick packs at Walmart that have HMO in them, and they work. Like I actually put like a pretty well-known guy in the fitness world on it, and he eliminated his lactose intolerance problem they had for years, so they work. But speaking to like colostrum versus pure HMO, the colostrum has HMOs in it. It does contain them. Colostrum is also more of like a kind of a whole milk product. So if you have other issues with milk, you may see a little bit of fermentation problems, a little bit of the gassiness, things like that. Where HMOs are just a pure carbohydrate, and HMOs in the gut are fermented by different bacteria, and as long as you have those bacteria there, you'll begin to ferment from there, and they'll help feed bacteria. So generally speaking, they're fairly well tolerated. They're both beneficial. Colostrum is very beneficial for working out and muscle growth and a lot of things. I know a guy that's a bodybuilder, a former bodybuilder, that used to go up to Bakersfield, where I live, every month to get some from a dairy farm, and the stuff was amazing for muscle growth. Where the HMOs, I would say, are more of like a surgical scalpel for gut health. That would probably be it. So that's the answer, is that the HMOs are very much aimed at gut health, and colostrum is kind of more broad spectrum.
And do I have it right that even taking HMOs or colostrum to a degree are going to be beneficial for your immune system just in the age of COVID? Isn't there a degree to where it's going to be helpful there?
It should be, yeah. There are so HMOs bind to specific types of antigens in the gut. They act as decoys for things. And one of the interesting things about COVID is that there seems to be a connection between the gut and the lungs after lung injury, and it's mediated by these little jump drives that can download information from one part of the body to another. They literally work like jump drives. They take the information of a cell and they plug into another cell and download that information. They're called exosomes.
Which is a process that just randomly happened as a result of unguided mutations over the years.
Gosh, it's absolutely fascinating when you get into that. Just incredibly fascinating. There's a lot of new revelations about how cells work, and one of the points I make in the book is that cells are computers. They're computers we might build in a couple of hundred years. So they compute in every meaningful way. And not only that, they use digitally encoded instructions, and they copy those instructions, but they're a merger of like a 3D printer, a power plant, and computational dynamics all in one. One of the interesting sort of revelations in newer years is that cells process signal from noise in their environment. They don't just process linear computation from code. They also make decisions based on stochastic information, or rather separating out from their environment what's meaningful and what's not meaningful, and they make decisions on that. And a cell can take its state, its general operating state, and download it into other cells. In fact, newer revelations have shown that that's transmissible from soma to germline, meaning from parent to offspring. So literally, the active cellular state of the parent can be downloaded into the offspring via these what amount to jump drives. That's essentially what they are. So it's absolutely fascinating.
Side note, I'm going to ask you a interesting a question that just popped in my head. So some of the frontline doctors, and again, just to be clear, this is not medical advice. I'm just asking Joel his opinion based on his understanding. But some of the frontline doctors, there was a handful, a group, a really highly credentialed, highly published group of doctors testified before Congress a few weeks ago, and one of them was talking about the benefits of a drug called Ivermectin, which is essentially a horse dewormer. I think it's actually the same thing that's in HeartGuard that you give to your dogs. It's a delicer. They put it on the outside of sheep and so forth. And he's recommending this as a protocol. He says, if you take this, you won't get COVID. Have you read anything about this?
I'm not familiar with that one. No, okay. I've not read up on that one. Yeah.
Probably better avoid it.
Interesting. That's a whole rabbit hole.
Yeah. I don't know. Apparently, I mean, a small dosage. They recommend a couple, and sort of prophylactically 2 small dosage. It's just that it's a anti-parasitic, and I was just curious if something like that is also then detrimental to issues such as gut biome and that type of thing.
I couldn't comment intelligently on it because I'm not familiar with the drug. I'll look it up. I'll have to, but yeah.
So, and again, I'm just throwing this at you as a bit of a curveball, but I did interview I'm not sure his exact title, but he's a molecular geneticist. I mean, he works in the field of vaccines and so forth, and he's a believer. And I just asked him some questions. Obviously, the whole issue of vaccines, particularly the mRNA vaccines, incredibly controversial right now. In my whole world here, I'm just trying to tell people, look, biblically speaking, according to the scriptural criteria, this is not the mark of the beast. On the other hand, there's a lot of issues with regard to freedom and government oversight and health and all sorts of different issues that we need to be cognizant of and careful of and so forth. But just based on your understanding of the mRNA vaccines, my personal perspective is I go, look, I'm relatively healthy. I'm not even 50 yet. I see no reason to get it. On the other hand, it looks like in order to travel to Israel, which I do several times a year, ideally, I'll probably have to be vaccinated. In which case, I'm not opposed to getting vaccinated. I've got other vaccines and so forth. But just what are your thoughts based on what you've looked at so far? What are you thinking with regard to? Really, it's the Moderna and the Pfizer that seem to be the two that are out there right now.
Me personally, I'm someone who I'm just very cautious when it comes to my health, and I'm one case I make in the book is that you shouldn't do anything all the time other than food, because balance is the highest truth of how the body works. And I've always been very, very cautious because I have personally experienced doing things that were under the aegis of health, and then I had long-term damage one way or another from those things. So I personally would not take any substance that's going to retroactively write into my DNA unless I really had a lot of data about the long-term effects of it. And that just hasn't happened yet. These are going straight from, essentially prototyping to human, which has never happened before. And especially when you're talking about the nature of how these things work, which is we're talking about, rewriting DNA. That gets a little scary. I just don't think we know everything yet about that. And I'm just, in my experience as a consumer, I've done many things over the years from some authority figure who said, no, this will be fine, you can do it. And then it, it wasn't fine. Right. So I'm probably a bad person to ask because I'm very skeptical of things that are just just don't have a long history with them, you know, and it takes a long time to see how things affect the body. We don't understand how the body works. Within the last 3-4 years, new organs, like 3 or 4 new organs have been discovered in the last 3-4 years. Okay. We don't understand how the mitochondria work completely. Like, it's not really known. So there's a lot of unknowns. It's not like we have this machine figured out.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, a lot of people are saying, well, I'm going to take a wait and see approach with regard to the vaccines. My thing is I'm taking a wait and see approach on the Chinese experimentation with superhuman soldiers, because if that goes well, I'm on board. No, just kidding. But no, it's scary, some of the stuff that they're experimenting with. Okay, so moving on, another very unusual protocols that you talk about in the book is something called the daisy cutter protocol. And I don't know if I was doing it right, but back when I read the book, I think for about a month, I would get a big plate of raw green beans. And I think you had recommended doing it with some egg whites and some different things. I would actually, the way I was doing it is I would just get a big plate of green beans. I would put a little bit of coarse salt on it, maybe pour some sauerkraut just for flavor. Not sauerkraut, but just the juices. And I would just sit there and eat and devour an entire plate of raw green beans. Again, maybe I did it wrong, but talk about this and tell me how I did it wrong, and then explain the benefits and what the purpose of that is.
What did you notice, just out of curiosity?
I'll be honest with you, I didn't really notice anything. Of course, I wasn't really super paying attention. I didn't notice anything too unusual. But yeah, I did it for about a month, and this would be essentially, I'd say during that month, I was largely doing a keto diet, and a combination of some intermittent fasting. So usually around 12 or 1 o'clock, I would eat a big plate of green beans. So I'd be hungry, so it'd be easy just to devour the green beans. And then I would usually eat a meal around dinner time. And then my problem is I snack. You know, after 6, 7 o'clock, I'm just eating. And so it's really a battle just to not eat bad stuff. And then I have the really bad habit of not being able to sleep unless I have at least 3 pounds of heavy material weighing on my stomach to push me down into the darkness.
Swaddle sleep, huh? Yeah. So the daisy cutter is like the first protocol that I did many years ago, like 2007. It kind of, for me, kicked the whole gut biome thing off. And when I did it, first of all, what it is you take fat to zero, you have a lot of protein, and then you have like a ton of cellulose, hemicellulose. Like I use green beans because they're just loaded with those fibers, and I do them raw. Which, by the way, the green beans are an immature form of bean, so there's not, doing them raw doesn't fit into the categories of like plant paradoxology that we've heard.
Lectins and so forth. Yeah.
Yeah, and if you guys want an interesting, if you're listening, go to Real Joel Greene at Instagram, and I just did I have a new show I put out called Unconfused, which is to unconfuse people, and I just kind of hit that one on the head. It doesn't work that way. Like there's a lot of lectins are very anti-cancer promoting. They're very beneficial. They work in conjunction with specific bacteria. Some are bad, some are good. So it's kind of debunking some of that stuff. But anyways, with the daisy cutter, it's basically it's a way to get in ketosis without fats. And I've measured this before. I've measured people and they're at 3 millimoles. With just doing the daisy cutter. And so you have a very large mass of green beans, very large amount of protein, usually in the form of like dense protein, animal protein, like chicken, egg whites, things like that. And you kind of when I did it for 7 days, and I went from 229 to 212. And I was just ripped to the bone. I had my body fat measured. In fact, I got the document. I went and pulled it back from the company that did it. And I was 6.7%. And I think I'll post it on social media, as a matter of fact, just to show it. And and so it worked amazingly well for me. And the thing that you most notice is that your bowel movements don't smell when you, and that's how you know. What happens is your poop turns green, doesn't smell, comes right out, and it's like you feel incredible. I felt incredible energy when I did it, and generally speaking, that's what I hear back. But it's very, very, very difficult to do. It's very brutal, and I wouldn't suggest doing it more than like once, maybe once a year at most. But I put it in the book as a proof of what you can do to how fast and how rapid you can see results just by recolonizing the gut. And that's really the thing, is that gut communities are rapidly modifiable. And the net of that leads us into this realm where some amazing things are possible, amazing things, like completely wiping out cravings just by retuning the gut, or getting body fat to drop, and all these really cool things just by retuning the gut, getting rid of lactose intolerance, and all these things just by changing out the bacteria in your gut.
Yeah, I think if it wasn't for the fact that I was starving myself for the first half of the day, it would be difficult to eat a whole plate of green beans for sure. But yeah.
It's hard. Yeah, really hard to do. Like, there's an interesting thing I've noticed with it over the years, which is the hypothalamus kind of it has a complex in it that sort of gives rewards points for food, and it's not static. Like, and if you've ever gone on a long hike and had a sandwich, that's true. Like, reward points for the sandwich went through the roof. Well, when you have too much of any one thing, what happens is the reward points go down, and it's pretty fast. It happens pretty fast, and I've noticed over the years, like, just doing it, like, my reward points have gone like here, to doing it. So the first time you do it, though, it's pretty good. It's pretty effective.
So another little interesting protocol that you recommend, specifically with regard to weight loss, is eating gelatin before bed. And that's something that I did implement, again, in the midst of all of my snacking and so forth. And what is the purpose of that?
Yes, no calorie Jello. It's one of the not so secret, or it's been a secret for a long time, but it's getting out there now. Amazing hack. And what it is so the glycine in the Jello, it affects a very key hormone made by your fat that makes insulin work better. And so what happens is that glycine, if you take it at bedtime, a lot of people will report, like, literally the next day, you can definitely see. And the way I know this works personally is the guy that runs Quest, used to run Quest bars, Quest Nutrition, is a friend and a skeptic of me. So, and we've been in big debates over the years on different things. And we were sitting down one day having a talk, and he was like, "That glycine thing, you know what? That actually worked. I think you're not full of it." And I was like, "I told you." And so a lot of people will report they feel thinner, like you can see it, literally see it the next morning. It's also very useful during the day, like strategically, to when you're dealing with hunger. So I will use like 5-calorie Ready Whip with a 5-calorie Jello. You get like 20 calories in, and you knock hunger out. It's great. It's a great tool.
Interesting. So let me ask you this question too, because and I'm sort of jumping back, but with regard to the apple peels, you also mentioned taking red polyphenol powder, so just sort of red berry powder or whatnot. And I've noticed, you used to be able to get this like at Trader Joe's or Target. It seemed like it was everywhere. Wherever you had green powder next to it, they would have the red powder. It seems like it's not really, you can find it on Amazon, or maybe if you go to Whole Foods or something like that, you can, a specialty store, but it seems like you can't find it as much. But do I understand it right? Just this red powder, it's essentially serving the same purpose as the apple peels?
So yeah, it's color pigments are food for commensal bacteria. So color pigments in food feed bacteria, and just getting those color pigments in, it's like feeding the fish. Think of it as human fish food. You're feeding the right fish that can thrive and let the ocean of the gut be healthy and clean. And so, but very much, they serve a very similar purpose. Yeah, for sure.
So this time of year, every year, I get so excited when pomegranate season starts, and all of a sudden you see pomegranates in the grocery stores, and I love them. They're my favorite fruit. And so pretty much from late October or November right up until now, you can still, I think, get them at like Costco. I'll eat a pomegranate every night. I usually just put in a little, I just mix in a little bit of yogurt with it, and I'll just eat a whole thing. So just eating pomegranates or berries or that sort of thing, as opposed to a powder, you're still getting the same benefits?
Oh yeah. Pomegranates are super, super, super healthy. Yeah, there's a number of compounds produced through pomegranate. Two are called urolithin A and urolithin B. And they do different things, but they're involved in things like helping muscle to grow and regenerating the mitochondria, and just, pomegranates are in that category of superfoods, like really very powerful food. Yeah.
I'm sure it kicks me out of ketosis, but it's worth it.
Yeah, it's okay. You don't want to be in ketosis all the time, either.
Right.
Like feasting is very important. Like you want to have cycles where you're balanced. You're in ketosis, but you're feasting also.
My wife got me a Trappist fruitcake, a big fruitcake for Christmas. So yeah, the whole ketosis thing's been out the door. That's pretty much a guaranteed 5-pound gain by the time you.
I know. I'm the same way. I can't have the stuff in the house. I look like a wood chipper. It's just like, just goes right in.
Yeah. So listen, we're pushing an hour here, and again, I want to be clear. There are so many concepts in the book. There's no way that we could even begin to cover them all. But as I said at the beginning, this really is unarguably for me the best book that I've read on the issue of nutrition, health, anti-aging, and there's something in here for everybody. Really, you're touching into issues of biohacking, anti-aging, again dealing with issues of autoimmune related diseases, and really you run the gamut of different issues. And I still think down the road you can break off and turn this into a series of books, because you've got your head wrapped around so many different concepts. But before we wrap up, again, there's a lot that we didn't touch on. Is there anything in particular that you really want to just touch on? And I want to make sure, I mentioned your website, veepnutrition.com. And the book, but I know you've got a weight loss program that you're rolling out soon. You've got all sorts of different things. Go ahead and just tell everyone what you're doing and what you're offering. And I want to direct folks to you, because I believe in it and I appreciate it.
First of all, Joel, to have you say that is that's one of those things in life you get to and you're like you can't believe, like Joel Richardson said that. I'm like, oh my gosh. So that's just such a huge compliment to me. Thank you so much for that. So I just rolled out a new course. It's called Immune-Centric Fat Loss. It's the first of its kind. And an odd thing when you get in the book is there's 4 chapters on body fat, which is like, well, this is about immunity, right? And what's a new perspective of immunity, and that immunity touches every part of the body. It is the first time that we've ever actually dealt with what happens when fat cells shrink. And so I'm very excited about that. It's been just doing amazing, really excited for it. And then, there's a bunch of goodies there, veepnutrition.com. Come to my Instagram, give a follow, and I do the best I can to respond to comments and all that. And so I'm just very grateful. God's blessed me, and, just here to be a blessing. So that's about it.
Amen. Well, thank you so much for doing what you're doing. Say your Instagram handle again.
Joel Greene.
Real Joe Greene at Instagram.
Real Joe Greene at Instagram. Okay. I'm actually not on Instagram. I was years ago, and now I just haunt Twitter, unfortunately. It's probably one of the unhealthiest platforms of social media, but it works.
Wherever social media goes, violence follows. Just give it long enough. It's true.
Crazy times. So again, thank you so much for writing the book. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing this, and I trust that this will spark a lot of interest, and it'll be beneficial and a blessing for everyone that's watched. So we're going to end it right there. Friends, thank you so much for joining us. Joel, thank you for being with us. We look forward to seeing you next time as we'll jump back into the Maranatha Global Bible Study. Until then, God bless and have a fantastic week.